there are a lot of times and experiences in our lives and in the world around us that are really unfair, unjust, and just simply not right or okay. And trying to navigate through that for anybody really, but particularly for somebody that might have a strong sense of empathy, which is very common among people that have experienced childhood trauma, navigating through that can be incredibly challenging. It can feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. You can feel really powerless and even hopeless about what it might mean for our future and the people around us. So today, I want to talk a little bit about how to navigate it in a way that can help you feel still somewhat connected to your sense of power, and maybe even most significantly, reduce some of the weight, the heaviness that you might be feeling as a result. So, if you've experienced childhood trauma or any sort of abuse in your life, you have experienced an incredible sense of unfairness or reality, not just a sense. You've experienced a reality of something being really unfair, because especially as a child, you had no choices, you had no power, and to have somebody abuse you in whatever way that might be, that is unfair in every aspect of what unfair could possibly mean. So you have lived with that throughout your life. And as a result of that, probably have experienced some other things that have left you feeling and experiencing the reality of things being unfair and unjust. And in the world, there can be a variety of ways that we can see things that are unfair and unjust and just not okay. And most of it, we have no control over. And that is really difficult. And as survivors of childhood trauma, part of how we cope with that is trying to make sense of things and trying to find a way to control things, to make them happen or not happen. Doesn't mean you're trying to control other people. You're trying to control circumstances so that life is a little bit more fair, a little bit more just. So whether it is something like when somebody passes away at a really young age, when they die, whether it's sudden or maybe they have like cancer or something like that, and they die, and whether they're a child or a young adult, just kind of starting to live their lives, or even somebody who's a little bit older but maybe just retired or something like that. Those are the kinds of times that we tend to look at death and feel like that feels so unfair, especially for children. And unfortunately, we've all bared witness to some horrific realities in terms of children losing their lives with what has happened in Gaza and also in Ukraine, but I think we've seen a lot more in Gaza. And of course, things that happen here in the US or even in Europe, UK. So that's one way that we can experience and witness injustice, unfairness. We can also witness it in looking at what is deemed as criminal activity. Somebody who might steal to feed their family versus a white-collar criminal who steals just to make more money, right? Like, and the person who steals to feed their family often ends up with consequences where the other person often does not. That's definitely a huge form of unfairness and injustice. Things like people who no matter the age of the victim, but people who engage in abusive, violent behavior towards another human being and can get off in terms of any sort of consequences, where other people have to bear the reality of that experience and the life sentence, so to speak, of the pain that causes. And the person who did it, the person who made the choice to do the crime, nothing happens to them. And there could be a number of reasons that is the case. And we are in a place in the world right now in which there are a lot of things happening that are unfair and unjust. And if you're on social media, if you watch the news, you are likely being inundated with so much of that. Again, in lots of different ways. And it can be hard to figure out how to navigate that, how to even kind of show up in your life day to day, because some days it can feel just so incredibly overwhelming. And part of our previous, anyway, way of coping, maybe current way of coping, is avoiding, right? We want to turn away. Sometimes it can even become a form of minimizing, and that's where that can get really pretty dangerous for us and for the things that are going on around us. So how do you balance not becoming so incredibly overwhelmed and feeling powerless with standing in your power, taking care of yourself, and being able to deal with within yourself, or maybe in a bigger way, some of those things that might be present? And I think one of the most significant and, well, maybe not easy necessarily, but kind of simple things that we can do is be really mindful and intentional about the information that you're taking in. So whether that is news or social media or specific people maybe that you follow or subscribe to, being really intentional about how much you're taking in, so how much time it's taking, the energy that it's taking, both emotional and maybe physical, and what is the news, the information that you're taking in that day. So on some days, it may not seem quite as significant in terms of what's happening. Other days, there may be just so much going on that it can feel too overwhelming. So being mindful of that too. In all reality, I am going to present something that I'm presencing because whether people are consciously aware or not, particularly if you're in the US, but it is happening in other countries as well, there is a lot happening that we do not have a lot of power to do anything about at this particular moment, in terms of just quickly being able to change it. And that is related to things that are happening in the government. And I've talked before about policies, right? Policies that affect any of us and all of us to some degree. Maybe for the better. Sometimes those policies can be beneficial. Sometimes those policies can be quite hurtful. And right now, unless you're a very wealthy person, much of what is happening is going to be hurtful. No matter what side of the political spectrum you might be on, it is going to be hurtful. And so thinking about really, what are you taking in? I know that in the first week, or the week of the 20th, I had to make a very conscious decision to step back, to give myself some space, because I was following what was going on and it was a lot. And I was finding myself feeling really filled again with so much anger. and a sense of powerlessness in many aspects. So being able to recognize how much information are you taking in and what kind of impact is it having on you. So if you find that you're feeling particularly stressed out, you're particularly worried, no matter what the information is, it could be about the fires, it could be about a new case that comes up in the news around a child being murdered or abused, whatever it is, being able to take a step back and think, okay, I want to be informed, and that's a good thing, but what can I really do with this right now? And probably if you're feeling overwhelmed, the most important thing you can do is take a step back and just take care of yourself. So really being mindful and intentional about what you're taking in and limiting it when necessary, no matter what it is that you're taking in, right? It could even be things that are really difficult in your own life or stressful in your own life. Like if you, there are things going on in your personal life that, let's say, are not catastrophic, but stressful, lots of different areas that are stressful. Even being mindful about recognizing, okay, I can't deal with this all at once. So what can I deal with right now? So kind of taking one thing at a time. So again, the information that you're taking in, the types of things that you're taking in and feeling like you need to or you should be doing something with, when in reality you really probably can't. So that can apply in a lot of ways, right? The other thing, which I just kind of touched on, is what do you have the ability to do something about? So obviously, if it's something happening in your own life, you're likely going to have a little bit more choice or control about some of those things. Likely have some, right? So not necessarily that you will have control over absolutely everything and you should be able to just fix it immediately. But there might be some things that you are struggling with in your personal life that you might have some control over. You might be able to choose something, even when it might seem that you don't have a choice, because that is something that people will often say is, well, I don't really have a choice. I have to do this. And it may feel as though you don't have a choice. You may think that the repercussions mean that you don't have a choice. But you do still have a choice, in part because there's a good possibility that those repercussions that you imagine may not actually happen, right? For example, you might think, well, if I don't do this thing this person wants me to do, they're going to get really mad at me. Well, they might, but is it possible that they may not? And I know for a lot of you, that is going to be the case. I fully recognize that depending on what it is, and for some of you, no matter what it is, but the person itself will determine that somebody may be mad at you. But we let our fears, we go to that automatic thing because it's what we've always done. So really thinking about, what do I have a choice in this particular circumstance? So if you're feeling completely overwhelmed and you feel like you don't have time to do the things that you absolutely have to get done, and somebody is wanting something from you, being able to think, okay, I can put this on the back burner. This doesn't need to be done now. Or I can practice saying no. I can practice saying not now. And that's not easy. And I'm fully aware of that. But when we're talking about, well, healing generally, about being able to feel less stress in our lives, that is a really important practice, just at any point. That is a really important practice. But when you're feeling overwhelmed about so many things that feel so difficult, that is really important. So what do I have the ability to do something about? And for me, going back to the example I gave a moment ago, last week, I didn't have the ability, so the week of the 20th, I didn't have the ability to do anything about everything that was happening, the constant updates and that kind of thing. I didn't have any ability to do anything about what was actually happening. I did have the ability to step back and not take in absolutely every moment that was destructive. And that's what I chose to do. Now, this is where avoidance or minimizing can come in and be somewhat problematic. What is important to be able to do is take a step back so that you're no longer feeling overwhelmed. So you're not caught up in that intensity of feeling. And then take a step back and think, okay, what can I do about this? And part of that is likely going to be self-care to help get you out of that sense of stress or overwhelm. And then part of it might be maybe you decide to learn a little bit more about that thing so that you have more understanding of it. It might be connecting with some people that are like-minded about something, that have a similar feeling or goal around that, connecting with those people. It might be the choice to become more involved in some way. Like, this happens across the globe, but I can speak more to what happens here in the US. More in recent years, probably the last 10 years or so, there have been people that have run for Congress, for example, that had no intention on ever becoming a politician, but ended up doing it, whether it was kind of at their local level or in a national way, but who chose to get involved because something in their own personal experience caused them to move into action. And for them, that action was getting into a position that helped them change things at that level. I'm certainly not suggesting that that is what you should think about doing. I'm certainly not thinking about doing that. But there are a variety of ways that you can learn, that you can get involved, that you can have conversations. And sometimes those conversations are just about processing, just about finding connection with other people. Those are things that you can do. And when there is something that you can't do, for example, a child losing their life, when there is something that you cannot do about that, and you're feeling that sense of grief and injustice in the world, what you can do is maybe connect to a sense of gratitude, not to bypass those feelings, but to connect to gratitude in a way that helps you connect to the truth of your experience or reality. Maybe connect to gratitude for your health, or for the health of people that you love, for not experiencing that sort of grief firsthand. Or if you have experienced grief, and it's important that it feel real to you, feeling gratitude for the time that you did have with the person that you're grieving. Again, not to bypass it, to say, oh, well, I'm just going to be happy that I had the time, and now that they're gone, I shouldn't be upset. Not at all what I'm talking about. You can hold both at the same time. We're not used to that as humans, really, but we do have the capacity, and I think it's important to be able to learn to hold both of those things. Here, people in the US that have followed reproductive health and that sort of thing are probably aware that on the 20th, when power shifted in this country significantly, a woman, Cecile Richards, died that day. I didn't know her. This emotion is not my personal grief about her because I did not know her. It's about how difficult it is and can be feeling that reality of people who exist in the world, who live their life in a way that is so hateful, so hurtful, not caring about other people. With such power to help so many and instead chooses to hurt them. And you contrast that to a woman who dedicated her life to the opposite, to fighting for people, for fighting for rights, for being able to think outside of her own little bubble, who lost her life. And again, this isn't about her. People die every day. Really good people die every day of all ages. And I'm not saying that bad people should die. It's more about that sense of unfairness, injustice, right? And that can be hard. So thinking about, no matter what the circumstance is, when you're feeling that sense of injustice, there's going to be a piece of that you need to feel, that you need to allow yourself to feel, whether it is sadness or grief or anger or hopelessness. Comes from other sorts of feelings before hopelessness. So certainly I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you feel into that sense of hopelessness. If you can feel into your other feelings first, you are less likely to go into that place of hopelessness. So frustration, disappointment, again, anger, grief, sadness, fear about what it means that somebody who is trying to feed their family goes to jail, and somebody who steals millions of dollars from somebody as a white-collar criminal, nothing happens to them. And the fear of potentially finding ourselves in a similar sort of place. And of course, there's so much happening right now. Again, I can speak specifically to the US, in which there are a lot of people who are very, very afraid and have been for a little while for a variety of reasons. So feeling that fear, acknowledging that fear, being able to identify what that fear is, and without telling yourself that you have nothing to worry about, or that you shouldn't be this afraid, or you should just pick yourself up by the bootstraps and do something about it. Again, we have the capacity for both. We have to be able to honor what is there and also be able to make choices that help us move through it in a way that is connected and productive. And productive doesn't mean that you have to run for office and change laws. It doesn't mean that you have to do something big that everybody knows about. Being productive can be taking a step back and practicing self-care. It can be turning off the news and maybe watching something that lifts your spirits. Productive is doing something intentional that helps you feel better, that helps you feel better so that you can show up better for yourself, first and foremost, and then the people around you. That is productive. And it's so important to recognize it as such. Because when you feel like, okay, there's so much going on and there's so many causes, right? And I get caught up in that a lot, that it does feel so overwhelming. And again, we feel powerless to do anything because it's just too much. I have struggled at different times through my career, particularly since going on to social media in 2010, I think it was, seeing different kinds of things happening. I used to feel like, as somebody who was sharing content, the types of content that I felt like anytime there was something going on in the news that was at all remotely related, that I should talk about it. And it felt really overwhelming and caused me to end up pulling back a little bit. And I kind of went through cycles, and that's happened over the years, but I was able to recognize at one point that, okay, I talk about impact and healing from childhood sexual abuse or childhood trauma generally. That is my lane, so to speak. That is what I know about. That is what I feel very confident in talking about. I think it's what I'm best at talking about. It's okay to stay in that lane. But there are times that I struggle with that, with different things that are race related, different things that are even domestic violence, even though there's a very, very, very strong correlation between childhood trauma and domestic violence. So I do talk a little bit more about domestic violence because of that. But wars, like all of that stuff matters. It matters to me. It matters in the world. It's really important stuff. But my area of expertise is one lane that kind of has a little offshoots, but one lane, right? And so for just regular everyday people, maybe they don't have a particular area of expertise. Maybe that one area is being willing to have conversations about things that are going on. Again, making sure that you're taking care of yourself through that, making sure that you're not having conversations with people that are not at all open to having those conversations. Having those on occasion is okay and even good at times. You just have to be really mindful of who the person is and where it's likely going to go, and then making sure that you're taking care of yourself afterward. And again, this could be about any conversation, right? So taking a step back, recognizing what you're feeling, or more so even specifically that you're feeling something. You don't necessarily have to absolutely name it. If you can, that's great. And journaling can help with that. So limiting how much information you're taking in, and then taking care of yourself through it, making conscious choices about what you're going to do, whether that's self-care or if there's something you want to do to change it or to make it a little bit easier to navigate for yourself or for others. And being really mindful about choices that you make to do something, making sure that you're taking care of yourself through that and the impact that it's having on you. No matter who you are, if you're somebody that is in public office, and I know that there are some of you that watch this channel, if you are in public office, there are very specific things that you can do. Now, you don't have a lot of power over whether or not it happens, but, and again, that can be at a community level. It doesn't have to be at a big national level. But you have the ability to be involved in something like that, which is great. But again, you only have so much power, right? What we tend to do is we tend to take these things on and feel like I have to do something. I need to do something. I should do something. But sometimes, or oftentimes, we can't do something that's going to drastically change the circumstance or the situation. And I'm talking about things that are more on a bigger community or global scale, right? So, okay, I can't do that. I feel responsible for doing something, but I recognize I can't do anything about that. What I can do is take care of myself so I can continue to show up, so I can continue to have conversations, so that I don't give up and lose my sense of power within myself. So whatever you might be feeling, and again, this isn't I know that I ended up talking about what's happening politically right now in the US. But again, what happens here in the US does affect other countries. Apparently, I haven't been able to see anything really about it, but apparently there are other countries that are finding themselves marching in the streets, in part because of what is happening here, impacting other places. Well, I've talked about some things that are political. This applies to any area in our lives in which we do have that sense of feeling that things are not fair or that things are unjust. That is a really hard thing for so many of us to feel and to experience, because it reinforces that sense of powerlessness. And there are a lot of things in this world, in our own lives, that we do not have power over. And that can be hard. But there is so much also that we do have the ability to have power in and choices about. So maybe even if you journal or have a daily planner, maybe start incorporating some of those things into how you think about that. Like, how did you take care of yourself today? Did you limit the information that you were taking in? Is that something that you can improve upon tomorrow? How are you feeling about what you took in? What little step did you take to feel more empowered? And again, that could be choosing to limit your information or taking care of yourself. It could obviously be something more significant than that in terms of a bigger picture for the community or the world. But truly being intentional about taking care of yourself so that you can continue to show up in your own life and for the people around you. That is important, and that matters, because without that, nobody, no matter who you are, no matter what role you might have, if we're not doing that, we can't do any of that other stuff. Which is why I chose to step back last week, and why I have given myself to the end of this month, the end of January, to just feel all the feelings and be in that space of anger and disappointment, because anger is secondary to hurt and fear, remember? And I am feeling a lot of that anger. And I'm feeling at times a sense of powerlessness. So I'm giving myself the rest of this month to just allow myself to feel, to do some of what I've shared today. And I am feeling like I am in a place where I don't know what it's going to look like. It might just be creating more community opportunities here on YouTube, but really getting involved, being really intentional about doing something that hopefully is helpful. And part of that is, and I decided this when I was away for a few weeks, that I am no longer posting on social media for a couple of reasons. On Facebook, anything meta related, I have stepped back from that. I am no longer posting for Courageous Journeys there. I don't really post there for personal stuff anyway, but I'm no longer on Facebook or Meta. In part because it just doesn't align with me any longer. There was a fine line there, and it's definitely, we've crossed that line. But also for my own capacity, because knowing that, well, even though the last few months and going into these next 4 years, knowing that I need to allow my energy to be more streamlined. And if you happen to follow me on TikTok, I don't think I'm going to be posting there, even if it stays. Again, it seems like there might be some misalignment in what's happening with TikTok lately, but that is one of the ways that I am choosing to kind of take a step back, thinking about what I do have the ability to control, thinking about the energy and the capacity that I have and what I want that to look like. And no matter who you are, no matter what you do for work or in your spare time, whatever it might be, you have some capacity for that as well. And I really encourage you to spend some time, and maybe it looks different now than it might in a few months or at the end of the year or 2 years from now. It can change as you change, as you feel into different things, as different things are happening around us. Just allow yourself, give yourself the opportunity to be mindful of what you need at any particular time. And remember that none of us are alone in anything that we might be struggling with. And together, we have the capacity to create such significant shifts within ourselves and around us. We are more powerful than we so often believe that we are, again, within ourselves and in the world. So together, we can do this, and together, as always, we heal. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this community. Until next time.